So, just to let you know, if you have any thoughts on this movie, you can simply holler at me in the comments. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel and another installment in my John Krasinski review series, where I'm going through all the movies directed by John Krasinski leading up to A Quiet Place Part 2. And today we're talking about his second film, another little scene movie called The Hollers. So let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were if you've actually seen it, as well as make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about The Hollers. Krasinski stars as aspiring NYC artist John Hollar, who returns to his Middle America hometown on the eve of his mother's brain surgery. Joined by his girlfriend, 8 months pregnant with their first child, John is forced to navigate the crazy world he left behind as his dysfunctional family, high school pals, and overeager ex flood back into his life ahead of his mother's operation. While this is only Krasinski's second film behind the camera, it was 7 years between this and his directorial debut, Brief Interviews with Hideous Men. And it seems like, similar to that film, this one was not widely seen, not even making back its $3 million budget. As I said in my previous video, I hadn't even heard about this movie until recently, as I honestly thought A Quiet Place was Krasinski's first film behind the camera. But unlike his other 3 films, this is actually the only one where he does not have a hand in the screenplay whatsoever, with this instead being written by Jim Strauss, who's also a director in his own right. But this does see Krasinski move in the direction of something he would be critically acclaimed for in his next film, which is telling an emotional family drama. While Krasinski himself is playing what's meant to be the main character, this is really more about this family as a whole. And like Brief Interviews with Hideous Men, it contains an all-star cast. Richard Jenkins and Margot Martindale play Krasinski's parents, Don and Sally. Charlton Copley plays his brother Ron. Anna Kendrick's girlfriend Rebecca. Josh Groban appears as a reverend who's also the second husband of Copley's ex-wife. Randall Park is Martindale's doctor, while Charlie Day is her nurse named Jason, who also went to high school with Krasinski and is married to his ex-girlfriend Gwen, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead. So there are a lot of great names all appearing here, and I'd say that the cast itself is the best thing about this. Everyone is so charismatic, and they all seem like they were having a lot of fun with the material. I also thought the chemistry among nearly everyone came off as very natural. I also like the film's earnest tone. That's one thing that carries over big time into A Quiet Place, though utilized in a totally different way. This is an extremely well-intentioned movie that tries to explore broken family dynamics, but it doesn't look to do it so much in a mean way or by necessarily vilifying any of the characters. It's more in the way of showing us, hey, we all have baggage and we all have our own problems, but we're trying to work through what we can together, but sometimes we have to deal with it in our own ways. We see how John's trying to balance revisiting his past while also thinking ahead to the future as Rebecca's about to give birth. We see how Ron has a hard time getting over his divorce as he's struggling to be away from his kids. Both Don and Sally reflect on their own lives and the decisions they've made, contemplating their own happiness in the face of this existential moment in their lives. And we see them all trying their best to support one another while also dealing with their own individual problems, while this crucial operation hangs over all their heads. And it can be sweet seeing these characters supporting one another, and it's elevated a bit by the solid performances of the cast. And I think, even though this doesn't look like it's been too widely seen, I feel this may have its audience from those who eventually seek it out and are in the mood for a smaller, intimate family drama. Now, unfortunately, while there are some nice things here, there are also a number of things holding this movie back for me. One of them being that it'll feel extremely familiar and predictable. It hits some nice themes, but in its execution, there's still this level of playing things safe. While I'm not expecting a movie centered around a family coming together in the wake of an important surgery to be anything too ambitious, what this film does is present us with some sort of conflict or subplot, but then said conflict will get quickly resolved, usually within another 2 scenes of whenever it was revisited. It'll build a lot of these subplots up, only to come back to them another 10 to 20 minutes later at most, then usually resolve it or just move on to the next thing. This happens with nearly everyone, but I'd say the biggest instance is where Krasinski is invited to have dinner with Charlie Day and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, both of whom haven't seen him in years. And it sets up that their marriage isn't going so great, and Charlie Day is jealous of Krasinski being back in town since he used to date Winstead, and when she first sees him, she attempts to make a move on him, though he rebuffs it. But after that, We never see her again for the rest of the movie, and any sort of resentment between Day and Krasinski is promptly dropped, and Day just acts as Martindale's nurse and nothing more. Storylines come and go like this all throughout the film, and it comes off more like this was just checking off boxes as to what beats it needed to hit, and that's it. And the idea is supposed to be that these characters confront their past, they grow, and move on. But even though we see them change a bit as the film progresses, because we don't really spend too much time in each of these subplots, that growth doesn't always feel 100% earned. It felt more like characters will quickly come to their senses over something, but more because the script calls for it rather than it feeling like a 100% natural progression. Now, this would have all been slightly forgivable because all these performances are really enjoyable and everyone does elevate the material. And had it not been for the other big issue I had with it, I would have still said this is a mild recommendations, my problems with it aside. But this film ultimately loses me in its attempts at comedy, which you think wouldn't have been so much of an issue because you do have a lot of extremely funny people in the cast. But the humor's very hit and miss for me, and it misses a lot more often than it hits. You know, one way you'll often hear independent comedies be described is that they're quirky, and that's the feel this film is ultimately trying to go for with its humor. You'll have a number of scenes where characters utter these non sequiturs during the worst possible moment, or you'll have characters be aggressively confrontational with one another, sometimes when it's uncalled for, but it's being done for the sake of milking some laughs. But it almost never lands. And I don't blame the actors themselves for any of this because it's not like they came off as if they were phoning it in or anything. Now, I don't know if they had any room to improvise, but if they didn't, I think they may have needed that because if all the lines here were in the script, a lot of the dialogue they're all given just was not funny. Randall Park as the Doctor was one of the biggest disappointments for me, as he's meant to be very deadpan, saying almost all of his lines with a totally straight face, but he comes off more like a jerk rather than actually funny. Like the first scene we see him, the family's all waiting to hear how serious Martindale's condition is, and he walks in and says almost offhandedly that he was late because he was golfing. And just within the context of the scene, the way it's said and the way it's brushed off makes him sound kind of mean. And we get that almost every time we see him, and it just never amounts to anything funny. I'd also say that most sequences with either Sharlto Copley or Charlie Day, who played the two most eccentric characters, were a bit painful to get through. Copley's inability to get over his ex-wife is basically all there is to his personality, and it results in multiple scenes where he's either sitting outside her house, trying to take his kids, or constantly get into confrontations with Josh Groban. But it just comes off as very creepy, especially as there's nothing else really defining the character. Ironically, I found Groban to actually be one of the funnier aspects for me, just for how he never once lost his temper at the most bizarre things, so the way he played off some of the more out there situations really worked well. Charlie Day, though, is basically doing a shtick that's very similar to what he does in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which, to be clear, is a show that I absolutely love, and I think he's great in it. But that show works mainly because it places these very weird characters in a more heightened reality, whereas this has a more grounded feel. And you may not have him do some of the more extreme things he does on that show, but you do have this character who turns literally every conversation into this aggressive confrontation, sometimes where it's just not needed in the scene. And that heightened style doesn't work for a more grounded film like this, and it just totally misuses his talent. Meanwhile, Krasinski's performance itself was fine, but his character, on the other hand, was poorly written. Basically due to the fact that his behavior is never consistent. For much of the film, he basically plays the straight man to everyone else's antics, and a lot of his dialogue when he's, say, with either Sharlto Copley or Charlie Day or Richard Jenkins or whoever it is, it's just him reacting and telling them they need to stop whatever it is they're doing. But then, anytime we see him interact with Anna Kendrick, he starts acting really eccentric himself, stumbling over himself all the time, saying all the wrong things and making her feel bad. And the thing is, it's never established that he was ever like that otherwise. So in turn, it just makes Anna Kendrick's role even more thankless, as the majority of her scenes are just of her talking to Krasinski over the phone and checking in on him. And all she's basically doing is just reacting to this guy who's normally level-headed in any other situation, who's now being weird himself. And it all just comes off as very choppy and disjointed. And while the film's ultimately well-intentioned, and the cast is trying to make the most out of it, unfortunately, there's only so much they're able to do with this material. While The Hollers isn't a movie that's been seen by all that many, I think it can find its audience with those who do get around to checking it out, because it does have a great cast who are all doing their best, and it's a very well-intentioned film about a family with a ton of baggage who are doing their best to come together in a troubling situation. The issue, though, is that the film plays things way too safe, bringing up conflict and resolving it way too quickly, making each situation feel like it's just going down a checklist rather than getting us involved in deeply emotional drama. And while there are times the cast successfully elevates the material, it's often undermined by the film's cringe-worthy humor that mostly does not land. It's another commendable effort by Krasinski, and while I think it is watchable, there are plenty of other movies that did this better. The Hollers gets a 5.5 out of 10. So stay tuned. Up next in the series will be my review of A Quiet Place. But in the meantime, let me know, did you see The Hollers, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like this story? Do you have a favorite family drama? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.